We're going to go into a Q&A panel now. Dionne Walsh, who you would remember from the previous panel, she's going to facilitate this one. So I'll hand over to her to introduce the people to be answering the questions.
Thanks, Nicole. Well, we've got a couple of special guests here in the studio with us this afternoon. We do have Gil and Angus, who were just introduced by David in his video, and we'll probably throw to them for some questions because David's actually unable to join us live on the panel today. It was a very entertaining video, very enjoyable to watch, and we look forward to talking to Angus and Gil about their experiences with wild dogs or dingoes. But firstly, before we go to the guys here locally, I do want to address some of the questions, I guess, that have come in through the chat box to the earlier speakers. I also need to let you know that Marie isn't joining us on the panel either, so we won't be able to answer any of the questions that were directed to Marie. But for you, Morgan, there's quite a few questions have come in, and the most popular one at the moment is from Leanne, and she asks, has there been any allowance for the movement of native wildlife across the properties in the cluster fencing projects?
Thank you, Leanne, and for the other audience members. This is a topic that we are quite aware of. I think the best way to answer that is if people want to go to the Rapid site and see the mapped area of the region. So the 168 landholders and the 2.2 million hectares that we've developed is a small part of the overall region. In addition to that, many property owners don't fence waterways and that sort of area where a lot of native animals do use, to move around the region. So probably the easiest way is for people to have a look at the maps, and then if they've got specific questions about a particular area, they can come back to us.
Thanks, Morgan. And a related question, I guess, is a question from Giselle Wish, who asks, do you have an idea of how much control of macropods was undertaken initially, and do all properties in the cluster contribute to the control of macropods?
No is probably the short answer. I'm imagining what Giselle is asking perhaps about mitigation permits or sort of something like that. Happy to have more of a discussion on that offline with a little bit more detail. I'll probably just need a bit more detail on that question. Sorry.
So just before we had our technical outage, I'd asked you a question, Morgan. Do you have an idea of how much control of macropods was undertaken initially, and do all the properties in the cluster contribute to the control of macropods?
Thank you. Look, the short answer to the first part of that is I'm not sure. We have no record of how much macropod control or the fencing went up. In regards to post-fencing, each individual landholder control macropod regulation or part of the project that says they have to or don't have to. So it will really come down to an individual basis on that one.
All right. Well, I might actually bring Gil and Angus into the conversation. Gil, you made a big change many years ago, 26 years ago, to stop actually just really battling with the dingoes. What made you change the way that you did things?
Well, about 40 years ago, they brought in 1080, wheat 1080, and probably wiped out 3/4 of our dingoes overnight. Immediately, the goats come in, probably, I don't know, thousands of them. The kangaroos multiplied, the wallabies multiplied, the pigs multiplied by 10 to 100. So then we kept trapping and shooting a few dingoes until 26 years ago, and I just stopped. Since then, there are no foxes. The cats are about half. The pigs are bugger all, kangaroos bugger all, wallabies bugger all. In small family groups scattered around, the kangaroos are from 3 to 8. So because there's no foxes, there are other things that they eat that are now there in, I don't know, hundreds of thousands. I didn't even know they existed before. Squatter pigeons, yakka skinks come to mind. The whole ecology system is now just extremely healthy. Now, that's not me saying that. As researchers being there numerous times, doing lots of research, told me that's what it is.
Thanks, Gil. And what about you, Angus? You've obviously been doing this for a long time too, more than 20 years. And so what motivated you to completely change the way you were doing things?
We moved out of sheep because of the decline in the sheep, the wool price, the bottom fell out of the wool price, and only we were. But in having cattle and leaving the dingoes alone, I've had similar results to what Gil just stated, and I think that, okay, I'll put a caveat at the start. Dingoes don't go well with sheep or goats. But in cattle country, which is a lot of it in Australia, when you leave dingoes in the landscape, they self-regulate their numbers and they get rid of most of the roos, and in our case, all the foxes, all the cats and most of the pigs. So as David said, we actually have control of our stocking rates. So when we get rain, we get more grass, we get more return from our stock, our country is healthier, and we can buy and sell our stock and control the numbers to regulate the condition and the health of our country without all the roos eating it out. So I started a group called Landholders for Dingoes on Facebook, and I invite any of you to have a look at it. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail now. Anyone's welcome to contact me at any time. I've published a paper in the Australian Zoologist about it. But I would like us nationally to have a discussion about how we are managing dingoes in the Australian landscape and the impacts it's having. And we need to look at the hard data, get all the best scientists together and experiences of people, and actually look at a more nuanced approach across the landscape towards how we control dingoes. And I'd also like to point out, Gil and David and I aren't exceptions. There are a lot of people doing this, but most people won't stick their head up, because as soon as you stick your head up and mention you don't kill dingoes, all the industry associations and all the other graziers jump on top of you. So we're sticking our head up and trying to create enough clear air so that all the other people that are doing what we're doing and getting very good financial and landscape health results are willing to do the same thing.
Right. Thank you. So yes, we have, I guess, two different industries really here. And I think that's important to keep that in mind, isn't it? So for people with large stock have different approaches, and for small stock producers, there's other solutions required. I've got a question for you, Morgan, from Peter Johnston, and he asks, does the satellite imagery and analysis, for example, using something like Veg Machine, show beneficial ground cover changes for clusters that have been around for a decade?
Thanks for the question, Peter. I don't know is the short answer. I think the challenge we've seen natural vegetation regrowth has been that the 10-year period that he, as Peter well knows, has been 10 really tight, tough years here. We're hearing a bit of anecdotal evidence from landholders that are fenced as come back that they haven't seen before. But I don't know if that's available on satellite. The best we can go for at the moment is the anecdotal evidence. I would hope that if the seasons stick with us for the next 4 or 5 years, we will see something. But I don't know that it's available at the moment due to the lack of rain in the region over that period.
All right, thank you. And Robin Cowley has got a question more, I guess, around the animal production performance in those clusters. Are you able to give the audience an indication of what proportion of the improvement in the animal production can be, I guess, put down to the lower predation on the sheep versus the lower total grazing pressure due to the control of the roos?
Look, thank you, Robin, for the question. The short answer on this is no. This is a bit of a theme this morning. What we're looking for, and it's difficult to tell about that, like obviously kangaroos don't eat your livestock, but they are competitive graziers, as you know, other people have indicated. What the anecdotal evidence is, or what the landholders are telling us, is that it's beneficial on both counts. So one, obviously, is that if you don't have the pests, whether they be wild dogs or pigs, coming lambs or having an impact on your production rates, that's obviously an issue. The other one is in regard to feed budgeting. So if there is the ability to better monitor or better use all of your country. So one of the challenges, obviously, with small stock and wild dogs is that if, there might be, and that comes back to a control point, if you can't use 20% of your place, for example, because there's dogs up there and that sort of stuff, and you can't use it for small stock, that's 20% of your place that isn't productive to you and your overall production system. So what we're finding, sheep are grazing, right out to the fence lines. They're grazing right up into pockets and corners that they have grazed before. So I think it's a mixture of both of those things. But no, we haven't captured with being due to one or the other, and I'm not sure exactly how we do that. But no, we haven't done it at this stage.
All right. And there was a question here for David, who's, as I said, unable to join us, about how significant are the dingoes in reducing feral pig numbers. But I might put that question to you, Gil, because I gather that you have feral pig issues. What's the tie-up there?
We don't kill pigs because they are dingo tucker. Whenever a mother pig has 4, 5, 6, 7 babies, by the time they're as big as a cat, you never ever see more than 1, maybe 2 following mum anymore. The dingoes have obviously got the rest.
And do you have anything to add to that, Angus?
We have dingoes eating pigs at home. We've got a lot of channel country. We're in the channel country, and we do have some pigs, but they certainly keep their numbers down. The other point I'd like to make about dingoes in cattle country, like in our situation, we spend no money on feral animal control, and I think our outcomes are probably better than any other place in our immediate area anyhow.
Very interesting. And there's a question from Wendy Phelps here, and I'm not entirely sure who this was directed to, so you might all like to give your perspectives on this, but are the dingo numbers causing any detriment to native wildlife numbers other than kangaroos?
Can I take a first stab at that? The only place in Australia where we're not suffering severe decline in small mammal numbers is the only place in Australia that hasn't been landscape baited with 1080, and that's up in the parts of the Kimberley. Native animals survive much, much better when they've got dingo families, not dingo packs, but dingo families that live in a territory. We have actually recorded 3 new species of small mammals on our place this year. So apart from controlling how much grass we've got and how many roos, well, it keeps the roos down, we're also getting major biodiversity conservation outcomes, which doesn't add to our bottom line in the short term, but it's certainly something agriculture needs to look at in the long term, because if we can't keep our ecosystems functioning, as we heard in the keynote speech this morning, the whole of agriculture is in trouble. So it's something we need to be looking at long term.
Yeah, after our 1080 baiting, the dingoes got wiped out. Then they bred up again and ate everything. The numbers of dingoes that we have now, I would strongly suggest, is about half what we used to have. Now, when we had twice as many as we have now, we still had lots of foxes because we used to trap them pretty regular. We had lots of cats. Now, with half the number of dingoes, but we have the alpha males and females controlling, looking after, educating, teaching their young ones dingo etiquette and keeping their little areas, their home base, clean of what they don't like. They keep them out, whatever it is, dog, cat, you name it, they keep it out. So since then, the numbers are about half, and this other wildlife is coming back tenfold.
The other, if I could just make one more point, by having dingo families on our place, they protect their territory. So no other packs of young dingoes come onto the place, no feral dogs come onto the place, and the families actually self-regulate their numbers. So you don't end up with big packs of young dogs going around killing things. So by having the families there, not only do they look after our native wildlife and keep our room numbers down, they stop packs of young dingoes coming in and they stop feral dogs coming in.
And for you, Morgan, I guess within the cluster fencing projects, has there been any research associated with that work with regards to monitoring wildlife populations and how they're changing?
We've been approached by a number of universities and wildlife groups potentially looking at bringing native animals back and putting them inside the cluster fences to see, if they're going to actually be able to, stay in that. At this stage, I don't know of any that have completed those studies. So accept anecdotal information from landholders.
And Gil, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, the dingo and all these native animals that are already become extinct or close to being extinct all evolved together for, well, the dingo's been here for 5,000 or 6,000 years apparently. So for 5,000 or 6,000 years, they all evolved together. The new item in all this is the cat and the fox. So the dingo keeps the fox and the cat out of the system. So it stands to reason to me that the native animals, dingo included, must be able to live together in harmony again once we stop interfering in the wrong way.
Okay. Now, there's quite an interesting question here. I was amazed to hear the cost of putting in the fencing, Morgan. It's very expensive infrastructure, obviously. And I've got a question here from Bob who asks, was the cost of reinstating the sheep infrastructure graziers, and so they just stayed running a beef enterprise instead?
Look, in regards to the program that I manage, it's a voluntary program. We send expressions of interest out in order to do that. We've always been oversubscribed. We've never got as much money as people have asked for. Example of that is the most recent round. The expression of interest was for $5.5 million worth of government funding, and obviously we compete with the rest of Queensland in regards to that, so we only got about half that amount in. So in regards to Bob's query, none of the landholders that have ever spoken to me that have fenced said they shouldn't have done it. They all told me that they should have fenced 5 or 10 years ago. Their returns have paid for the fence within 1 or 2 years, and that's beside the fact that we've seen significant land prices in most recent years. Regarding sheep infrastructure, many people, I suppose it comes back to what their life. So many of the sheep producers that are long-time sheep and small stock producers, to say those are shearing sheds or bits and pieces like that, and so it's been that example I showed before in the photo. That shearing shed was built in the late 2000s and has basically sat idle and a bit of hay and a few things in it for the last few years. So generally the amount of expense required to reinstate that they've seen as being worthwhile. We've also seen a number of new shearing sheds built on places on the back of the fencing. So again, from the landholders' perspectives that are involved in the program, the profitability is there for them to invest in the fences and then continue to reinvest in the operation.
So I've got a question in terms of, so within any given region, there's obviously groups of properties that have come together to form a cluster. Are there any, I guess, issues or problems between neighbours who are in a cluster versus those who aren't? And what are the nature of those issues and how's the community dealing with that?
Oh, look, for sure. I mean, neighbours are the same whether you live in town in Noosa and, you have an argument about your fence, or you're a landholder in Barcaldine or Longreach. So, yes, of course, we've seen issues with neighbours. This program, again, is a voluntary program, so the landholders can choose for themselves, who comes into their. After dealing with neighbours, we have no regulatory ability. There's no regulation that says that, the neighbour's got to contribute or not in regards to our program. The $4.5 bit over 4,000 kilometres of fencing that I've done in my program. There's only been an issue out of those 168 landholders with 2 neighbours where there's been, it's in one particular case it's gone to court under the QCAT system, and in the other one, they've worked it out through a third-party intermediary. So, and that's probably for about 20 kilometres of fencing. So, out of 4,500 that we've done, there's only been significant disputes over about 20. And again, it is a volunteer program. So those people that don't want to fence, that's completely up to them. There is no, we have no regulatory ability to make them. It's a volunteer program at this end.
Thanks, Morgan. There's a really interesting producer online, Linda. She says there's a lot of money in goats and meat sheep, but she's a beef producer and she's questioning her economic viability in the face of longer and harder droughts, because a goat can be traded way longer than a cow if in drought and returns are higher. And she asks, if she fences, she has options to change enterprises, yet she could be making an ecological regression as animals can't traverse her country. Her question is, does she fence?
Tough one.
I can't answer that one. It's a personal choice that everyone has to make. There will be ecological